Two aero defense companies are vying for a major Canadian procurement contract. Against the backdrop of Donald Trump's trade war, the federal government here launched a review a year ago of its plan to purchase dozens of F-35 fighter jets from the U.S. firm Lockheed Martin.
You've just heard from the headline report that two air defense companies are vying for a major Canada procurement contract. Yes, Canada just turned to Sweden for one of the most important defense systems it needs for the future. And this is not only about aircraft. It may be one of the clearest signs yet that Canada no longer sees deep dependence on America as automatically safe. For many decades, Canada's defense system has lived inside America's shadow. The aircraft, the command systems, the intelligence networks, the software, the spare parts, the weapons integration, and the wider logic of continental defense have been tied closely to the United States. For a long time, that made sense. America was Canada's closest neighbour, largest trading partner, most powerful military ally, and the centre of North American defence through NORAD and NATO. But now the equation is changing. Canada is not abandoning America. That would be too simple, and it would not be accurate. The United States will remain central to Canadian security for years to come. However, Ottawa is now clearly asking a question it avoided for too long. What happens when your closest ally also becomes your biggest strategic vulnerability? That is why Canada's move towards Sweden's Saab matters far more than a normal defence procurement story. In May 2026, Canada announced that it was entering discussions with Saab of Sweden as the preferred supplier for its future airborne early warning and control capability. The system being discussed is Saab's GlobalEye, an aircraft designed to detect threats across the air, sea and land, while helping commanders understand what is happening before danger reaches Canadian airspace. In plain English, this is an eye in the sky. For a country like Canada, with massive Arctic territory, long coastlines, and growing pressure in the north, that matters enormously. But the bigger story is not only what GlobalEye can see. The bigger story is what Canada now sees about itself. Canada did not choose a US system as the preferred path for this early warning capability. Instead, it moved toward a Swedish system built around Saab's sensors and based on the Canadian-made Bombardier Global 6500 business jet platform. That combination matters. Swedish technology, Canadian aerospace, Arctic surveillance, a European NATO partner, and a major defense decision that is not automatically centered on Washington. This does not mean a final contract has already been signed. Saab itself says there is no contract yet, and no order has been received. But the direction is still important, because defense decisions are not only about today's aircraft. They are about tomorrow's dependency. And this explains exactly why the story is important. Modern weapons are not just machines. They are supply chains with wings. A surveillance aircraft is not only a surveillance aircraft. A fighter jet is not only a fighter jet. These systems come with software updates, spare parts, maintenance contracts, training pipelines, data links, weapons compatibility, upgrade schedules, classified integration, and political exposure that can last for decades. When a country buys a major weapons system, it is not just buying steel, engines, radar, and electronics. It is buying a long-term relationship, and that relationship can become leverage. That is the hidden mechanism behind Canada's defence shift. Who writes the software? Who controls the upgrades? Who supplies the spare parts? Who approves weapons integration? Who owns the maintenance pipeline? Who can delay support during a political dispute? These questions are not abstract. They determine how much freedom a country actually has when pressure arrives. And while Canada is choosing Sweden for its eye in the sky, it is asking those exact same questions down on the runway, which is precisely why the country's multi-billion-dollar F-35 plan is suddenly facing a historic review. Canada had planned to buy 88 F-35 fighter jets from Lockheed Martin in a deal valued at about 19 billion Canadian dollars. The F-35 is a powerful fifth-generation aircraft with stealth, advanced sensors, and deep compatibility with US and allied systems. For many military planners, those advantages are serious and cannot simply be dismissed. Notwithstanding, the F-35 also pulls Canada deeper into the American defense industrial system. It creates long-term reliance on US sustainment, software, upgrades, weapons integration, and political reliability. In a calm world, that may look manageable. In a world where the United States is becoming more unpredictable toward allies, that dependence begins to look like a strategic risk. That is why Ottawa's review of the F-35 plan matters. It has not officially cancelled the F-35 purchase. It has not officially replaced it with Sweden's Gripen. Those claims would go too far. The accurate point is that Canada is reviewing the full plan, while reports and political debate continue around whether a different mix of aircraft could better serve Canadian interests. That distinction matters, because this is not a childish story of America bad and Sweden good. The real question is much sharper. Which dependency is Canada willing to live with for the next 40 years? The F-35 offers stealth, interoperability, and high-end capability within the US-led system. The Swedish Gripen, if Canada ever seriously moved in that direction, offers a different logic. Lower operating costs, easier maintenance, road base operations, and possible industrial cooperation. Those are not small differences. They represent two fundamentally different ideas of what national sovereignty is worth. And this brings us straight to the economic heart of the matter. Defense procurement is not just military strategy. It is industrial policy in uniform. It decides where jobs go, which companies grow, and who controls technology. It also decides whether domestic firms build capability or remain dependent subcontractors inside someone else's system. It decides whether a country can maintain its equipment during a crisis, or whether it must wait for another capital city to approve the next update. For years, Canada accepted a simple procurement logic. Buy American, integrate with America, depend on America, and trust that the alliance would remain stable. But recent American politics has shaken that assumption. Tariff threats, pressure on NATO allies, unstable trade relations, aggressive rhetoric toward neighbours, and uncertainty around America's long-term commitments have forced many partners to think differently. The issue is not whether America is still powerful. It obviously is. The issue is whether allies can assume American power will always be used in predictable and cooperative ways. This is why Canada's wider defence industrial strategy matters. Canada has openly talked about reducing reliance on US defence suppliers and strengthening domestic defence production. Reports have noted that roughly 70% of Canada's defence procurement spending has gone to US products. That number explains why this debate is not symbolic. It is structural. If most of your defence spending flows into one foreign system, your military capability becomes tied to that system's politics, industry, timelines, and priorities. Canada is now trying to change that equation, not by cutting ties with America, but by building more options. Sweden offers one option. Europe offers another. Canadian aerospace offers another. Domestic defense production offers another. The point is not to replace American dependence with Swedish dependence. That would simply move the problem from one capital to another. The point is to build a wider defense ecosystem where Canada has more leverage, more domestic capacity, and more room to maneuver. GlobalEye fits directly into that logic. It is not simply a plane. It is an airborne command and surveillance platform that can help Canada see farther, earlier, and more clearly across its air and maritime approaches. That is especially important in the Arctic, where geography is vast, weather is difficult, infrastructure is thin, and strategic competition is getting sharper. Canada's north is no longer a distant empty space in global politics. Russia is an Arctic power. China has shown interest in northern routes and polar access. The United States is watching the North Atlantic and Greenland more aggressively. Europe is rethinking security, energy, and supply chains. In that environment, Canada cannot defend Arctic sovereignty with slogans alone. It needs sensors, aircraft, satellites, ships, bases, runways, ports, railways, roads, and command systems that actually work. It needs to know what is approaching before the threat becomes immediate. That is why early warning matters. But there is a risk in diversification too. If Canada tries to operate too many different defense systems from too many suppliers, it could create new problems, separate training pipelines, different spare parts, more complicated maintenance, higher integration costs, and weaker interoperability with the United States. A mixed defense ecosystem can create resilience, but it can also create complexity. That is why Canada has to get the balance right. It needs the United States, but it also needs options. It needs NATO compatibility, but it also needs domestic capacity. It needs advanced aircraft, but it also needs systems it can maintain, upgrade, and operate under pressure. It needs allies, but it cannot build its future on blind trust. That is the turning point. For decades, Canada often treated alliance and dependence as if they were the same thing. If a system improved interoperability with America, it was assumed to be good for Canadian defense. But alliance and dependence are not the same. An alliance is a choice between partners. Dependence is what happens when one partner controls too much of your ability to act. That is why the Saab decision matters. Not because Sweden has replaced America, not because the F-35 is dead, not because Canada has suddenly become strategically independent, but because Canada is finally asking who controls the systems that defend it, the software, the spare parts, the sensors, the upgrades, and the supply chain. In the next defense economy, the country that controls those things may control far more than aircraft. It may control the freedom to act. Canada is not breaking with America. It is learning that a serious country cannot build its defense future on blind trust, even when the partner is its closest ally. The United States will remain central to Canadian defense, but the days of assuming that American dependence is always safe may be fading. The new Canadian question is sharper. How do you stay allied with America without becoming trapped inside America's defense industrial system? That is the real story. So, what do you think? Is Canada wisely diversifying its defense partnerships, or is moving away from deeper US integration too risky in a dangerous world? Drop your thoughts below and subscribe to TradEconomics for trade, economics, and geopolitics explained beyond the headlines.